Late at night, in a bright, humming room lit by vending machine glow and rows of computer screens, someone unlocks a narrow booth, sets down a small bag, and settles in for the night. Around them, dozens of other booths hold dozens of other people, doing exactly the same thing. This isn't a hotel, it isn't a hostel, it's an internet cafe. And for a quiet, largely uncounted number of people across Japan, it's simply where they live. Not for one strange night, not as an emergency, night after night, for weeks, for months, sometimes for years. To most people walking past the bright sign outside, this is just a place to browse the internet, read manga, or kill a few hours between trains. Almost nobody imagines it as someone's address. That's exactly what makes this story worth telling. Not because it's shocking in an obvious way, but because it's hiding in plain sight, inside one of the most ordinary, cheerful-looking businesses in the entire country. Japan is often described, accurately, as one of the safest, most orderly places on Earth. Official homelessness counts here are famously low, some of the lowest of any wealthy nation. And in a strange way, that reputation is part of why this story stays so invisible. If you're indoors, employed, and paying for a private booth every night, you don't show up in most of the numbers that measure this kind of thing at all. So who actually ends up here? Picture someone working a series of short-term jobs, a few months at a warehouse, a stretch of overnight shifts at a convenience store. Steady enough work to get by week to week, but never quite stable enough or documented enough to satisfy what a landlord usually wants to see.
Because renting an ordinary apartment in Japan often comes with a very specific, very upfront cost. Not just a deposit, but sometimes an additional non-refundable payment to the landlord, agency fees on top of that, and in many cases, a guarantor, someone willing to formally vouch for you, financially responsible if anything goes wrong. For someone with steady family support, that's an inconvenience. For someone without it, that combination of costs and requirements can be close to impossible to clear, even with a real job and real income arriving every week. So instead of a lease, they choose a booth, a private cubicle just big enough for a reclining chair or a flat mat, a small table, sometimes a curtain or a door for privacy. Pay by the hour or the night or occasionally by the week. No deposit, no guarantor, no paperwork beyond a membership card. It sounds on paper like a clever workaround. In practice, it often ends up costing more than it seems. Add up nightly or weekly rates over an entire month, and the total frequently comes close to or even beyond what a small apartment would actually cost. The difference is that none of that money ever builds toward anything. No lease, no deposit slowly becoming an asset. Just another night purchased, one at a time, indefinitely. And yet, for a lot of people in exactly this situation, it's still the more realistic option available to them, right now, tonight. Walk through the daily rhythm of someone living this way, and it starts to look less like chaos and more like a routine, oddly disciplined in its own way. A shift at work, afterward back to the cafe. A shower, using facilities the cafe provides specifically for guests staying overnight. Belongings stored in a small rented locker. Everything that matters compressed down to what fits inside it. Then back to the booth, the hum of the building settling around them, until the next shift begins the cycle again. Cafe staff, over time, tend to notice. The same face, the same booth, the same hours, night after night. Some staff quietly come to recognize their long-term regulars, without ever making a scene of it. It isn't officially part of the job. It becomes part of it anyway. It's worth being honest about who tends to end up in this situation, because it isn't just one type of person. Some are younger, having left an unstable or unsafe home situation, without savings or a guarantor to fall back on. Some are older, living on a limited fixed income, for whom a private, indoor space at a predictable nightly cost feels safer and more dignified than the alternatives available to them. Many are working, often in temporary or dispatch roles, employed but never quite securely enough to satisfy the paperwork a landlord expects. What connects almost all of them isn't a lack of effort or a lack of a job. It's a system that quietly assumes a certain kind of financial stability and family support, just to get through the front door of a normal apartment, and offers very little room for anyone who doesn't already at it. For a long time, this entire situation had no real name, and without a name, it was easy for it to stay unofficial, uncounted, and largely undiscussed. That changed gradually, as journalists and researchers began documenting the pattern closely enough to describe it directly, giving this population a specific term in Japanese that translates roughly to Internet Café refugees. Naming it didn't fix anything on its own.
But it did make the phenomenon possible to study, to survey, and eventually, in some places, to respond to. In recent years, a number of municipalities and support organizations have begun reaching out specifically to this group, running surveys inside café districts, offering pathways toward more stable housing, recognizing that many of these individuals don't think of themselves as homeless and are unlikely to ever walk into a traditional shelter to ask for help. That distinction matters more than it might seem. A shelter can feel like an admission of a crisis. A private booth in a bright, normal-looking business can feel, at least for a while, like simply making do. None of this erases what internet cafes actually are for the vast majority of their customers. Most people who walk through those doors are exactly who the signage suggests: gamers, manga readers, commuters killing time, people escaping the summer heat for a few cheap, air-conditioned hours. But somewhere in that same building, often just a few booths away, someone is quietly living an entirely different version of the same ordinary evening, not visiting, staying. And that's the part of this story that's easy to miss, even for people who walk past these cafes every single day. The line between a customer and a resident inside the exact same building can be almost impossible to see from the outside, and in many cases, that's precisely the point. The next time you pass one of those bright humming signs late at night, it's worth remembering that behind at least a few of those private doors, someone isn't stopping in for an hour. They're simply home, in the only version of home currently available to them, waiting for whatever comes next.